Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 9 of my 2023 reads. This week I finished some books that I've been working on for a while, which made me very happy. Plus, I read some favorite books and I DNF'd a couple as well. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. First, I finished Africa Risen, edited by Sheree, Renée Thomas, Oghenechovwe, Donald Ekpeki, and Zelda Knight. This is a SFF short story collection that I buddy read together with Angela at Literature Science Alliance and Kristen at Kristen L. SFF Reader, who I will link below. And this is a collection by African and African diasporic authors, kind of ranging the whole speculative fiction genres, so fantasy, sci-fi, horror, and all the combinations. If you have seen the video that I did of Hugo nomination possibilities, I'll link that below as well. Some of the stories from this made my list. They were just so fantastic. So there were some stories in this that were just so impactful and so just really my style. I absolutely loved those. I think that the drawing on different experiences and mythologies and storytelling styles of various African and diasporic authors was so cool. However, even though I loved some of the stories, there were a lot of stories in this that didn't work for me. Angela and Kristen and I had so many interesting discussions because each of us has kind of different taste. So having the three of us kind of chat about each of these stories as we went forward, it's really apparent how much taste comes into play when you're figuring out what you like and what you don't like. And a lot of these stories were just a little bit too dark for me. They had too much grimness, too much violence, too much body horror. I'm so squeamish, so the number of stories that I had to DNF in this collection just because they were too violent or had too much body horror for me was quite a lot. And then past that, there were just a number of stories in this that weren't quite my style. Maybe they were a little bit too like weird fiction, experimental, or just grim, you know. So overall, I think that this collection really was curated for a different type of reader than me, but I think that if you can handle some of those darker stories, it could super work for you. And there were so many stories in this that really truly were gems, and not all of my favorite stories were favorite stories for Kristen and Angela, and they had some other stories that for them were favorites. So I think that this is just one of those cases where there's a wide spectrum of stories in this, and if you pick this up, I think you'll find some favorites as well, but you know, just go in knowing it's a little bit grimmer than I was expecting, at least. So overall, this collection for me was 3 out of 5 stars. Then another book that I've been working on for a while that I finished this week was Sanctuary by Andi C. Buchanan. So this is a book that I had picked up maybe half a year ago and started and only just got around to finishing. It is basically kind of a slightly creepy haunted house type of story, but it's not really horror. I would say this is actually more gentle in a sense. It's a contemporary fantasy set in New Zealand about this old house where a bunch of queer and neurodivergent people live, and they've kind of made this found family, this community, where the world is a kind of tough place to be queer and neurodivergent, but they found each other and they kind of support each other. And a lot of them also have the ability to see ghosts, and many ghosts inhabit this house, but they're kind of part of the family as well. However, at one point, there is a ghost eater, so a very dangerous kind of old ghost that comes and is threatening their ghosts as well as them and their kind of sanctuary, their house that they have built for themselves. And so it's about them kind of coming together and figuring out how to fight against that. I think that if you like queer found family and you want a story that is like really celebrating that, I think that this is great. But I did think that this also was a little bit slow for my taste, and I like slow things, so if I'm finding it slow, I think it's actually quite a slow story. And it did a little bit of info dumping, which also doesn't always work for me, where there's quite a lot about what it's like to be queer and neurodivergent, and there'd be like little sections explaining kind of what everybody is going through. And I think that that is real valid lived experience, but I think that it was just info dumped a little bit for me. So I think that this story has some very interesting magic in the way that the ghosts work, and that it's very based in reality in a sense. This isn't a world full of fantasy, it's just that these people happen to be able to see ghosts. But the way that that kind of ties in with just their experience of the world in general by being different is really interesting. So yeah, kind of a mixed bag for me, but I still think that there's a lot in this book that is really, really worthwhile. So for me, I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read How to Turn into a Bird by María José Ferrada, translated from Spanish by Elizabeth Bird. So this is a very short novel that I ended up absolutely loving. I'd heard about Ferrada before because she wrote, I think, How to Order the Universe. I haven't read it, but now I want to go and read it. And I'd seen that kind of making the rounds on BookTube a year or two ago. And when I saw that this was coming out, I'd put this on an anticipated releases list, and I'm so glad that I picked it up because I loved it. This is a story basically told from a boy's perspective where his uncle is very different from everybody else and ends up getting a job taking care of a billboard, making sure that nothing happens to it, that the lights are on, all these sorts of things, and decides to go up to the kind of platform on the top of the billboard and just live there, just be separated from the rest of humanity. And it's sort of about how the community reacts to that and about the boy's sort of connection to his uncle. There is such beautiful writing in this. It is just really whimsical and atmospheric. This is also a slow book, but one that really worked for me. It's also quite short. I feel like you could read this in 1 or 2 sittings pretty easily. And it's just got this humor that is a little bit satirical at times, but also really loving and gentle. The world in this, the community right next to the billboard, is filled with some, not great people. And there's definitely some trigger warnings in this, so I'll have content warnings below if you want to check those out. But I thought that it was just really beautiful and just talking about a lot of interesting societal issues and the way that people who are different are treated. And I think the uncle has like sensory issues as well as maybe just some sort of neurodivergence. It's not like explicit in the book, but I just really liked the relationship between the boy and his uncle and sort of how everything played out. I thought that this was just such a beautiful read. I loved the writing. I definitely recommend this one. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I treated myself to a reread of one of my old favorites, which is Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. I have been trying to allow myself more rereads this year, and I'm so glad for it because I love rereading books. And this book, I fell into this and all I wanted to do was read it. So this is the first book in the Books of Ambha duology. I have a series review for that, so I'll link it below. And it is just such excellent world building and really cool characters and magic. I love Tasha Suri's writing. So this takes place in sort of a Mughal Empire inspired world that it has like an empire that has conquered many other lands. And one of the lands that it has conquered is this desert land where there is magic from the gods that are sleeping, and the people of that land are able to work with that magic from the sleeping gods. And we follow a woman who is the daughter of one of these desert people who are very much persecuted, and a governor of that area for the empire. And so she's kind of between worlds, but she ends up in a kind of forced into a marriage with a mystic to serve the needs of the empire, and her magic is kind of tied to that. The magic in this is so cool. It's sort of based on dance, the way that they work with the magic, and it's just every scene with magic is so immersive. I love the writing. It's so atmospheric. There's also like a really strong romance component in this book, which I love. I mean, yeah, I just think that this book has so much going for it. There are a couple of things in this one. This was Tasha Suri's debut that don't 100% work for me. There's just a couple of decisions that the main character makes where I'm like, what are you doing? So things like that kind of bring me out of the story. A little bit of melodrama at times, but even so, I just love the writing. I love being in this world. So I gave it, again, 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then I did have a couple of DNFs this week, starting with Read Dangerously by Azar Nafisi. So this is a nonfiction book where the author, who is Iranian, but she's lived abroad in the UK and now the US for many, many years, is writing letters to her father, who died about 10 years beforehand, but she'd had a long history of writing letters to him as a way to sort of process some of what's been going on in the world in, the last decade. Some of the issues of the Trump presidency and things like COVID and Black Lives Matter and all of those things, and sort of writing to him about the importance of reading lots of controversial things and different voices and different ideas, and using literature to explore these things rather than trying to ban books or go down authoritarian paths where we don't allow dissenting voices. So I thought that the premise of this sounded super, super cool, but I got 10% into it and I realized that it just wasn't going to work for me. One of the reasons is that this is really heavily about literary analysis, which isn't something that I always enjoy. So there's a lot of details, definitely spoilery details, about the books that she is going through and sort of analyzing that, and then also talking about the political outcomes, which is really interesting. And the framing of this, I also just sort of struggled with. So I thought that I would enjoy these letters to her dad. The problem is that her dad, who's Iranian, and she will have a lot of shared knowledge that many of the readers of this book, who are not Iranian, will not have. And so in these letters to her dad, who is, deceased, they're not real letters, she has to explain for the reader many, 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 many things, but it's written as if it's to her dad, and it just brought me out of the story every single time, where she would reference some Iranian thing and then have like a half sentence explaining what it was. So oh, that mountain, which is the highest mountain in Iran, and it's like, well, her dad would know that. Why is that there? Is there for the reader? And so it just brought me out of the book every single time. And so I realized, what, I think that what this book is doing with the literary analysis is really interesting, but not so much my thing. And then that aspect of the conceit of this being written towards her dad is just going to bring me out every time. So I DNF'd this one, but I think that if you are interested, if that kind of thing won't bother you, if you like literary analysis, this is still doing some really interesting things in terms of the discussions that it's having. And then the other book that I DNF'd was Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan, which is book 11 in the Wheel of Time. So if you've been around my channel for very long, you might know that my husband, Sush, and I have been reading through the Wheel of Time for like the past, 7 or 8 years. This is a series that we both read when we were younger, when we were teenagers, and it was really influential in getting us into fantasy. And neither of us had ever finished the series. I think I'd gotten around book 5 or 6, and he'd gotten to around book 9 or 10. And so a number of years ago, we thought, hey, let's read through this and finally finish it. So we've been reading through it, and he reads it out loud to me, which means that it takes us quite a while to get through a book. These are big, big, chunky books. And we thoroughly enjoyed the first few books in this series, but the past few books have been what's known as like the slog in the Wheel of Time, which is just some really, really slow books where nothing happens, the plot doesn't move forward, and a lot of people find it frustrating, and we were finding it very frustrating. And I think especially, even though we're not super plot-based readers, there's just some ticks of the story of Robert Jordan's writing that were really starting to get to us. Characters are often super two-dimensional. There's a lot of bickering between characters, these sorts of things. So we were just getting so frustrated, but we also knew that we were in the slog, and that it was supposed to pick up after this, and that the last few books in the series were finished by Brandon Sanderson because Robert Jordan has passed away. So we were like holding out hope. But then we got to this book. We got 68% of the way through this one, and stuff started happening. Like, there was actual movement in the plot. There were, you know, really interesting things in terms of the politics and the magic and the world building, all of that sort of stuff happening. And we just didn't care. So I think that basically what happened was this book got better than the last book, which was my lowest rated book of last year. And yet we just weren't enjoying it. I think that those aspects that had been frustrating us about the series got to be so pervasive that we just couldn't enjoy the story anymore. And I had like no investment in what was going on. I didn't care when things were, you know, interesting magic things happened, or when interesting like things were revealed about characters or plots or anything like that. It just felt like a chore to be reading this. And so we had some discussions and we're like, what do we want to do? We're really struggling to get through this. There's another 3 books that are each, you know, 800 plus pages in the series. And Angela at Literature Science Alliance had recently finished this series, and she'd told me, you know, you may not think that the payoff is worth it. And it doesn't sound like the books that are written by Brandon Sanderson really deviated from what Jordan was already doing. It's kind of just continued in that vein. And so we just kind of decided, you know what, maybe we just let this one go, because that's a lot of pages to read when you're just not invested, simply because it's a series you never finished when you were a kid. So we decided to DNF this series, and I think that we both felt a lot of relief after making that decision, because it is like a lot to go through when you're not really enjoying it. Sush did look up kind of what happens with the rest of the series. I didn't really care, but he told me a couple of highlights and I was like, yeah, cool. I guess. So this series was definitely an interesting experience for us, but I think that we're both glad that we have let it go. Okay, so that is everything that I read and DNF'd this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you are interested in them, if you've also had issues with reading big series and then finding that you don't actually want to finish them, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you want to tell me what you've been reading this week, I'd love to hear that too. Just leave me a comment down below.